technology, alerting Bina to diseases relevant to their new home. This was another aspect of herself she knew he appreciated, her fascination with his work. He'd told her how he'd been struck by this on their first date, sitting in a booth at Cap's Soda Fountain in St. Paul, sipping on a malted through a pair of white paper straws. He'd talked to her about his passion for fishing, because women, as he told her later, were frequently bored by medicine and bodies. To women in the past, he'd talked about the heart. He'd described the way the blood was pushed and pumped. He'd drawn diagrams on a paper napkin with his fountain pen. But these women always looked at him differently when they knew he'd held a dead heart in his hands. They'd gaze distastefully upon his fingers as if a bit of death were still caught under the nails. Fishing didn't interest Bina Dews. Neither did Ted's sister's wedding, his cousin's new baby, his mother's recent commission to have a well-known landscape painter sit in a rowboat half a mile offshore in Lake Michigan to do a portrait of their summer property in Door County, Wisconsin. Out of sheer desperation, then, he'd talked to her about the heart. "Did you know," he'd inquired, seeming to detect the initial signs of intrigue in this private girl who was smart around the mouth, "that a normal heart beats 72 times a minute?" She had raised a pale eyebrow. She was quite pretty, he later told her he'd thought that day, pretty in a way that sneaks up on you. "At this rate," he'd continued, "the heart contracts 4,320 times in an hour, 103,680 times in a day, 37,843,200 times in a year, and 2,649,024,000 times in an average lifetime. Or consider the common shrew," he added, "whose heart beats 1,000 times a minute." Bina had held out her wrist to him, and he, intuiting what she wanted, unhooked her silver charm bracelet and placed the fingers of her other hand over that bare place. He pressed his cold palm over her knuckles. She smiled at him when she located the beating of her own pulse. They held hands and stared at the second hand of the pink-lit clock over the cash register. 78, she said. 77. "Well," she had replied, "you're the doctor." The causative agent of Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Dermacenoroxenus rickettsii, is transmitted and perpetuated by the tick Dermacenor evanestus, Ted informed her now. It is a minute intracellular organism found in cells lining the intestinal canal of the tick, in the salivary glands, the ovaries, and in the eggs, and in an infected animal. "I thought Pueblo was in the plains." Bina jerked the steering wheel to avoid what was once a rabbit, now stretched to the size of a welcome mat across the asphalt. She glanced over her shoulder to make sure the baby was still sleeping soundly. He was. They had laid him in the top drawer of an old dresser, padded with a wool hunting blanket folded in eighths. The blanket was dotted with deer blood and gun oil. Bina had covered it with a clean kitchen apron, whose faint recollections of roast beef and molasses seemed homey imperfections more suitable for an infant. Theodore Gasper Johnson, Jr., 6 pounds 2 ounces, had been born 6.5 weeks earlier on March 5th. His birth was a bloody, prolonged affair and exquisitely painful, as Theodore Gasper Johnson, Jr. saw fit to enter the world as one might enter a forbiddingly cold body of water, toes first. At the last minute, he made a wrenching somersault, pulled and prodded by the obstetrician's thick-gloved fingers. For a long moment, he was silent. Bina had watched the doctor's face harden as he slapped her gray baby with a flat rubber hand. Then the baby coughed and rasped and breathed with his seaweed lungs, and the blood rushed to color his skin, and the face of the doctor softened at the slender thrill of new life. "It's called the Front Range. Not Rockies exactly, but nothing to turn your nose up at." Ted pulled a map from the glove box and unfolded it in his lap. "Pueblo is here, see?" he said, his finger hovering over the map and punching it whenever the Ford took a bump. "And the range is here." His finger made a crater in the paper where the mountains were supposed to be. Bina saw a small black dot and the name of a town, Rye. Ted pulled a paperclip off the cover of the Journal of Immunology and unfolded it. He slid one end carefully under the white bandage that covered his head. "Itch?" he growled, seeking out the prickly stitches with the tip of the paperclip. As a doctor, and one who had recently been forced to leave a job at a reputable clinic, he was a predictably reluctant patient. Had he not been so reluctant, the mastoid infection that had grown hot and irritated behind his right ear might not have required an operation to drain the abscess, just as his wife was.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.